Rain pelted against my apartment windows as thunder rumbled in the distance. I had been working late on a project deadline, hunched over my laptop for the past 8 hours. My stomach growled in protest as I realized I hadn't eaten since noon. The digital clock on my microwave read 1:37 a.m. The fridge offered nothing but condiments and expired milk. With a sigh, I pulled out my phone and opened a food delivery app. A nearby 24-hour diner was still delivering. Perfect. I placed my order, a burger, fries, and a chocolate shake, and settled back to wait, listening to the rain intensify outside. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of an older building in a quiet neighborhood. Most nights I appreciated the solitude, but during storms like this, every creak and groan of the building's frame made me uneasy. The power flickered twice as I waited, plunging me into momentary darkness before humming back to life. I moved to the window, watching raindrops race down the glass, and that's when I first noticed him. Across the street, partially hidden by the trunk of an oak tree, stood a man. Even through the rain, I could tell he was staring directly at my window. He wore what looked like a dark raincoat, his face obscured by shadow. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me after staring at a screen all day. But no, he was definitely there, and definitely watching. My phone buzzed with a notification that my delivery driver was approaching. I tried to shake off the unease as I prepared to meet them downstairs. Grabbing my wallet and keys, I took one last glance out the window. The man was gone. I hurried down the stairwell, the fluorescent lights flickering ominously. Outside the building's entrance, I waited under the small awning, rain still managing to spray my face. Headlights approached as a car pulled up to the curb. The delivery driver rushed over, food bag raised above his head as a shield against the downpour. "Order for Alex?" he called out, handing me the bag. "That's me, thanks," I replied, passing him a tip. As he turned to leave, I asked, "Hey, did you see anyone standing across the street when you pulled up?" The driver glanced over his shoulder. "No, man. Streets are empty. Who'd be out in this weather?" With a friendly nod, he jogged back to his car. As I turned to re-enter my building, something made me look down the block. Through sheets of rain about 50 yards away, I saw him again. The same figure standing perfectly still, face turned in my direction. A car passed between us, its headlights illuminating him briefly. He didn't move, didn't flinch from the light. My heart rate doubled. I fumbled with my keys and rushed inside. Back in my apartment, I locked the door, drew the blinds, and tried to calm myself as I unpacked my food. The burger had lost some of its heat during the journey, but I was too hungry to care. As I took my first bite, a sharp knock came at my door. I froze mid-chew. It was nearly 2 a.m. now. The building manager never came by this late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Quietly, I set down my burger and approached the door, peering through the peephole. The hallway appeared empty. I waited, wondering if I'd imagined the sound over the storm. Then another knock. Firmer this time. I looked again. Still nothing. My palms grew sweaty as I called out, "Who is it?" No response. Hesitantly, I cracked open the door, chain lock still engaged. The hallway was dimly lit, but definitely empty. I closed the door, double-checking both locks. Maybe it was a neighbor who had knocked on the wrong door and left. Or maybe the storm was causing something to bang against the building. I returned to my meal, trying to focus on a mindless video to calm my nerves. 20 minutes passed without incident. The rain continued its assault outside, punctuated by occasional thunderclaps. I had just finished eating when my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Let me in. I'm getting wet out here." Blood ran cold. I didn't respond, hoping it was a wrong number. Another text followed immediately. "I saw you at the window. I know you're home." I blocked the number and turned my phone off, hands shaking. Moving to the window, I carefully peeked through a small gap in the blinds. The street below was deserted. No sign of the man. I exhaled shakily, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. That's when I heard it. A soft scraping sound at my door. Not knocking this time, but something else. Something like fingernails dragging slowly across the wood. I backed away, grabbing a kitchen knife. The scraping continued, unhurried and deliberate. "Go away or I'm calling the police," I shouted, voice cracking. The scraping stopped. Silence hung in the air for what felt like minutes. Then, quietly at first but growing louder, came the sound of someone humming a tune I didn't recognize. It was coming from right outside my door. I fumbled for my phone, turning it back on to call 911. Before I could dial, the power cut out completely. My apartment plunged into darkness, the only light coming from my phone screen and occasional lightning flashes. The humming stopped. In the new silence, I heard something that made my stomach drop. The sound of my doorknob turning slowly, testing the lock. I retreated to my bedroom, locking that door behind me and pushing my dresser against it. My hands shook so badly I could barely dial 911. When the operator answered, I whispered frantically about an intruder trying to break in. "Officers are responding to multiple emergencies due to the storm," she told me. "Stay on the line. Someone will be there as soon as possible." A crash from my living room told me the front door had given way. Heavy footsteps moved across my apartment, deliberately slow. I heard drawers opening, objects being shifted. He was looking through my things. "He's inside," I breathed into the phone. "Sir, find a secure location and stay hidden. Officers are 8 minutes out." 8 minutes. It might as well have been 8 hours. The footsteps approached my bedroom and then stopped directly outside the door. A gentle knock followed. "I know you're in there," a voice called unnervingly. Calm. "I'm your delivery. Don't you want to know what I brought you?" I remained silent, phone clutched to my ear, knife in my other hand. "You ordered me," he continued. "I've come such a long way." The doorknob jiggled. The dresser scraped a few inches across the floor as he pushed against the door. "Please," I whispered to the 911 operator. "Please hurry." Lightning flashed, briefly, illuminating my bedroom window and the silhouette of a man standing on my fire escape. I stifled a scream. It couldn't be the same person. He had been at my bedroom door just seconds ago. Another push against the door sent the dresser sliding. Further, wood splintered as the door frame began to give way. In desperate panic, I lunged for the window, thinking perhaps I could escape down the fire escape before he broke through the door. As I yanked the window open, thunder boomed, and I found myself face to face with nothing. The fire escape was empty. Had I imagined the silhouette? I didn't have time to question it as the bedroom door finally burst open behind me. I whirled around, knife raised defensively, ready to confront my tormentor. The officers found me in the corner of my bedroom, knife still clutched in my hand, eyes wide with terror. According to their report, I was alone in the apartment. The front door was intact, still locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere. My food delivery bag sat on the kitchen counter, contents half-eaten. The delivery app showed my order had been completed at 1:53 a.m. My call to 911 had been placed at 2:47 a.m. Nearly an hour had passed that I couldn't account, for the police searched the building and surrounding area but found nothing suspicious. They suggested stress and exhaustion might have triggered some kind of episode. Maybe I'd fallen asleep after eating and had a vivid nightmare. They were kind but skeptical, clearly thinking I was either drunk, high, or mentally unstable. I know, what I experienced was real. The next morning, checking my blocked numbers, I discovered the strange texts were gone. But when I went to retrieve my mail later that day, I noticed something on my front door that made my skin crawl. 4 thin, parallel scratches running down the wood, exactly at the height where someone might drag their fingers. I moved out the following week. Sometimes on rainy nights like that one, I still catch glimpses of a figure watching me from a distance. And I never ever order food after midnight anymore. The rain had been falling steadily for 3 days, turning my secluded countryside property into a muddy island. Living alone in a house that had been in my family for generations had never bothered me before. But something about this particular storm felt different, oppressive, almost watching. The isolation that usually brought me comfort now made me uneasy. My nearest neighbor was 2 miles down the rural road, and with the weather deteriorating, cell service had become spotty at best. The old landline still worked, thankfully, a relic I'd kept despite everyone telling me to get rid of it. Tonight I was grateful for my stubbornness. The house creaked and moaned under the assault of wind and rain. Water had started seeping into the basement, and I'd spent most of the afternoon moving storage boxes to higher ground. By evening, exhaustion had set in, along with an inexplicable feeling of dread that I couldn't shake. I tried to distract myself with a book, but each noise, branches scratching against windows, the gurgle of water in the gutters, the occasional thump from the attic as the old house settled, made me jump. When the lights flickered for the third time, I decided I'd had enough of being alone. I reached for my phone, relieved to see I had 1 bar of service. I called my friends Jessica and Mark, who lived in town about 20 minutes away. They'd been wanting to see the house renovations I'd completed anyway. "Hey, I know it's a weird request," I said when Jessica answered, "but would you guys want to come over? This storm has me feeling really isolated, and I could use the company." Jessica didn't hesitate. "Of course. Mark and I were just saying we should check on you. The roads are pretty bad, but Mark's truck should handle it. We'll bring wine and snacks." Relief washed over me. "Thank you. I really appreciate it." After hanging up, I felt slightly foolish for my anxiety, but still grateful they were coming. I went around the house lighting candles as a precaution against power failure and tidying up the living room. As I wiped down the coffee table, movement outside the front window caught my eye. Through the rain-streaked glass and gathering darkness, I could make out a figure standing at the edge of my property where the lawn met the tree line. They were too far away to see clearly, but something about their stillness, the way they faced directly toward my house, sent a chill through me. I squinted, trying to get a better look. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or perhaps a neighbor had wandered over to check on me. But no one would just stand in the pouring rain like that. As I watched, a second figure joined the first, equally motionless. I backed away from the window, telling myself I was being paranoid. They were probably just lost travelers seeking shelter from the storm. But why wouldn't they approach the house? Why just stand there watching? Headlights swept across my living room as a vehicle pulled into the driveway. I rushed to the door, enormously relieved to see Mark's familiar truck. Jessica waved from the passenger seat as they parked, and both made a dash through the downpour to my porch. "You weren't kidding about being isolated." Mark laughed as they stepped inside, shaking off rain. "That dirt road is practically a river now." Jessica handed me a bottle of wine. "We brought provisions to wait out the storm." "Everything okay? You sounded stressed on the phone." I hesitated, not wanting to seem irrational. "I'm fine, just a little on edge with the storm. Thanks so much for coming." I decided not to mention the figures I'd seen. They were probably nothing, and I didn't want to seem paranoid. We settled in the living room, opening wine and catching up. Having them there normalized everything. The storm continued raging outside, but inside was warm and safe. After about an hour, I excused myself to use the bathroom. As I passed by the kitchen on my return, something outside the window over the sink caught my eye. My blood froze. 2 men stood in my backyard, just beside my trash bins, staring at the house. They wore dark raincoats, their features indistinct in the gloom, but their posture was unmistakably alert, purposeful. I hurried back to the living room. "There are 2 men in the backyard," I whispered urgently. Mark frowned, setting down his glass. "What do you mean?" "2 men standing by the trash bins watching the house," I explained, voice shaking. "I saw them earlier at the tree line, but I thought I was imagining things." Mark moved to the kitchen while Jessica and I hung back. He peered out the window, then turned to us, face serious. "Call 911. Jessica reached for her phone. "No service," she said, panic edging into her voice. "The landline," I remembered, moving toward it. Just as I picked up the receiver, we heard it, the distinct sound of the back door handle turning. Someone was trying to get in. We froze, listening. The handle jiggled more insistently, followed by a solid thump against the door. They were trying to break in. "The front door," Mark whispered urgently. "We need to get to the truck." We moved quickly toward the front of the house, but before we reached it, the power cut out completely. In the sudden darkness, we heard a crash from the kitchen. "The back door giving way, run," Mark hissed, grabbing both our hands and pulling us toward the front door. I fumbled with the locks in the dark, hands trembling uncontrollably. Behind us, heavy footsteps moved through my kitchen. Jessica stifled a sob beside me. Finally, the door opened. We burst onto the porch, rain immediately soaking us. Mark led the way to his truck, keys already in hand. We piled in, Mark in the driver's seat with Jessica and me scrambling into the passenger side. The engine roared to life, headlights illuminating the yard, and two more figures standing directly in front of the truck. "Hold on," Mark yelled, slamming the accelerator. The truck lurched forward and the figures scattered. We fishtailed down the muddy driveway, wipers struggling against the deluge. As we reached the main road, Jessica turned in her seat. "They're following us. There's a car behind us with its lights off." I twisted around to look. Through the rain-blurred rear window, I could make out the dim shape of a vehicle gaining on us, running dark. The country road was narrow and winding, made treacherous by the storm. Mark gripped the steering wheel tightly, pushing the truck as fast as he dared. "Try calling 911 again," I urged Jessica. She held up her phone, the no service message still displaying. The pursuing vehicle was close enough now that I could see it was an old sedan, probably dark blue or black. It accelerated suddenly, ramming into our rear bumper. The truck fishtailed dangerously, and Mark fought to maintain control. "What do they want?" Jessica cried. "I don't know," I answered, voice breaking. The sedan rammed us again, harder this time. Our truck skidded toward the ditch. Mark swore, wrestling with the steering wheel. "There's a police station in Miller's Creek, about 5 miles ahead. We just need to make it there." The sedan pulled alongside us, trying to force us off the road. Through the passenger window, I caught a glimpse of the driver, a pale face beneath a dark hood, eyes fixed forward with terrifying intensity. Our truck hit a particularly deep puddle, hydroplaning momentarily. Mark overcorrected and we spun, coming to rest half in the ditch facing the wrong direction. The sedan braked hard, stopping about 20 yards ahead of us. "Lock the doors," Mark commanded, reaching for his phone. Still no signal. 4 doors opened on the sedan. Dark figures emerged, moving toward us through the rain. They formed a line across the road, blocking our escape route. "Drive through them," Jessica urged, voice tight with fear. Mark put the truck in reverse, trying to back out of the ditch, but the tires just spun in the mud. We were stuck. The figures approached, steadily, now close enough that our headlights illuminated them clearly for the first time. They wore identical dark raincoats with hoods pulled low, and each carried what looked like a long hunting knife. Mark tried once more to free the truck, engine roaring, but it was useless. The figures were just yards away now. I could see their faces beneath the hoods, expressionless, eyes fixed on us with cold determination. The closest one raised his knife and brought it down hard on our hood, the sound like a gunshot in the confined space of the truck. We screamed in unison as he raised the knife again. Suddenly, blue and red lights flashed behind us. A police cruiser had appeared from around the bend, its spotlight sweeping across the road. The figures scattered instantly, running back to their sedan. The car peeled away, disappearing into the stormy night before the police could reach us. The officer who rescued us was equally puzzled and concerned. He'd been patrolling the area due to reports of a home invasion gang targeting isolated properties during the storm. According to his information, they'd hit 3 houses in neighboring counties over the past week. "You're lucky I was driving by," he told us as we sat in his cruiser, still shaking. These guys typically cut phone lines and cell towers to isolate their targets. They've been watching houses for days, learning routines, waiting for the right moment. The realization that I had been under surveillance, possibly for days, made me physically ill. The officer escorted us back to my house to collect some belongings. I couldn't stay there, not after what happened. As we pulled up to the property, his spotlight revealed something that hadn't been there before. a crude symbol painted on my front door, visible even through the rain. "That's their mark," the officer said grimly. "They tag houses they plan to hit." I moved in with Jessica and Mark temporarily while the police investigated. They never caught the group responsible. The only evidence found at my house was that symbol on the door and partial footprints in the mud that were washed away by the continuing rain. I put the house up for sale the following month, unable to shake the memory of those expressionless faces watching me through the storm. I check the locks multiple times each night now, and I never feel completely safe when I'm alone. Sometimes, when it rains heavily, I still imagine figures standing motionless in the darkness, waiting patiently for their moment to strike. The worst part? I later learned from investigators that this group had already been inside my house days before the incident. They found evidence they had been hiding in my attic, watching me from above as I went about my daily routine, completely unaware. The noises I'd attributed to the old house settling had been them, moving around when they thought I wouldn't notice. They had been waiting for me to go to sleep that night. If I hadn't called my friends, I would have been alone when darkness fell. The storm hit our small mountain town without warning. Weather reports had predicted rain, but nothing like the biblical deluge that began around sunset. Thunder shook our house to its foundation, and lightning turned night to day in violent flashes. Mom and I sat in the living room, a horror movie playing on the TV, though nature's fury outside was proving far more frightening than the film. I was 14 that summer, spending 2 weeks with my mom at our vacation cabin. Dad couldn't join us because of work, which meant it was just the two of us in our isolated home nestled among tall pines. Our nearest neighbors were a quarter-mile down the winding mountain road. "Maybe we should turn it off," Mom suggested, as another thunderclap made us both jump. "This movie isn't helping our nerves." I nodded in agreement, reaching for the remote. That's when I heard it. A distinct whistling sound coming from outside. Not the wind, which howled continuously, but a deliberate tune. Someone was whistling a melody I didn't recognize, slow and melancholy. "Mom," I whispered, "do you hear that?" She tilted her head, listening intently. Her face changed as she caught it too. The whistling, rising just above the storm's chaos. We moved to the window together, peering through the rain-streaked glass. At first I couldn't see anything through the downpour. Then lightning flashed, illuminating our front yard for a split second. A figure stood at the edge of our property, tall and motionless. They wore what looked like a long rain slicker, the old-fashioned kind that extended nearly to the ground. "Who would be out in this weather?" Mom murmured, squinting through the darkness. Another lightning flash revealed the figure had moved closer to our house. I could now make out something long and metallic in their hand, catching the light. Mom stepped away from the window, her face pale. "I'm going to call Dad," she said, reaching for her cell phone on the coffee table. She frowned at the screen. "No service. The storm must have knocked out the towers." "What about the landline?" I asked, unable to tear my eyes from the window, watching for another glimpse of the figure. "I'll check," she replied, moving to the kitchen where our old corded phone hung on the wall. I heard her lift the receiver, then the sound of her pressing buttons repeatedly. "Dead," she called back to me. "The lines must be down." I turned from the window, trying to calm my racing heart. "It's probably just someone who got lost in the storm," I reasoned, not believing it myself. "Maybe," Mom said, not sounding convinced. Either. She drew the curtains closed. "Let's just stay inside, keep the doors locked, they'll move on." We tried to distract ourselves by switching from the horror movie to a comedy we'd seen a dozen times, but neither of us laughed. The whistling had stopped, but somehow the silence was worse. 20 minutes later, a sharp knock came at the front door. Mom and I froze, exchanging alarmed glances. Another knock followed, more insistent this time. "Don't answer it," I whispered. Mom nodded, reaching for the fireplace poker. We sat in tense silence as the knocking continued, growing louder with each strike against the wood. Then it stopped. Seconds ticked by in silence. Had they gone away? I was about to suggest checking the window when we heard it. A new sound. The distinctive scrape of metal against glass. The noise came from the back of the house, something sharp dragging slowly across our kitchen window. Mom gripped the poker tighter, motioning for me to stay put as she moved cautiously toward the sound. I couldn't just sit there. I followed a few paces behind her, heart thundering in my chest. In the kitchen, we could see rain lashing against the window above the sink. Lightning flashed, and for a brief moment, we saw it. A face pressed against the glass, eyes wide and staring directly at us. In one hand, they held what I now recognized as a long hunting knife, its blade resting against the window. Mom stifled a scream, pulling me back into the living room. "We need to secure the house," she whispered urgently. "Check all the windows and doors. Make sure everything's locked." We moved through the cabin together, checking each entry point. Every window locked, every door secured. The whistling had started again, circling the house, sometimes close, sometimes farther away, as if our tormentor was patrolling the perimeter. "What do they want?" I asked, voice barely audible. Mom shook her head, face grim. "I don't know, but we're not going to find out. If they try to get in, we run to the bedroom, lock ourselves in, and if necessary, use the window to escape into the woods." The thought of fleeing into the storm-ravaged forest was terrifying, but not as frightening as the alternative. We gathered what makeshift weapons we could find: the poker, a heavy flashlight, a kitchen knife, and waited. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely. The cabin plunged into darkness, the storm suddenly louder without the hum of electricity to buffer it. Mom fumbled for the flashlight, switching it on. Its beam seemed feeble against the pressing darkness. That's when we heard it. The sound of breaking glass from the guest bedroom. Someone was coming in. "Go!" Mom hissed, pushing me toward the master bedroom. We ran, slamming the door behind us and turning the lock. Mom pushed the dresser against it, barricading us in. "The window," she instructed, pointing to our potential escape route. I moved toward it, preparing to unlock it, when lightning illuminated the yard below. A second figure stood directly beneath our window, looking up. They wore the same type of rain gear as the first, a hood obscuring their features. The knife in their hand gleamed dully in the fading lightning flash. "There's someone else out there," I gasped, backing away from the window. Heavy footsteps moved through our house now, slow and deliberate. Something scraped along the hallway wall as they approached, the knife dragging against the wooden paneling. The whistling had stopped, replaced by a low humming. Mom pulled out her phone again, desperately trying to call for help. Still no service. She looked around the room frantically, then thrust the phone into my hands. "We need to document this," she whispered. "Take pictures, write a message, anything, so people know what happened here." The footsteps stopped outside, our bedroom door. The handle turned, testing the lock. When it didn't give, something heavy slammed against the wood. The dresser shifted an inch. I opened Facebook on Mom's phone, hands shaking so badly I could barely type. I started writing, a post describing our situation, including our address, begging anyone who saw it to call for help. As another slam rocked the door, I hit post, hoping against hope that somehow when the service returned, someone would see it in time. The door frame splintered as another blow landed. The dresser slid further. Mom positioned herself between me and the door, poker raised defensively. "When they break through," she said, voice steady despite her fear, "run for the bathroom, lock yourself in. Use the small window there to get out, I'll hold them off." "I'm not leaving you," I protested. "You have to," she insisted. "Someone needs to survive to tell what happened." The door gave way with a final crash, the dresser toppling forward. Mom shoved me toward the bathroom as a figure filled the doorway, tall, clad in the dark rain gear, face shadowed beneath the hood. The knife in their hand was larger than I'd thought, more like a machete. I stumbled into the bathroom, locking the flimsy door behind me. Through the thin wood, I heard my mother yell, followed by the sound of a struggle. Something heavy hit the floor. Then silence. I climbed onto the toilet, reaching for the small window above. It was old and stuck, but adrenaline gave me strength. It finally opened with a groan of protest. Rain immediately pelted my face as I pulled myself up and wriggled through the tight opening. I fell roughly to the muddy ground below, pain shooting through my ankle. Ignoring it, I scrambled to my feet and limped toward the trees, rain and tears blinding me. Behind me, the whistling had started again. I ran through the forest in total darkness, guided only by occasional lightning flashes. The rain was relentless, the ground treacherous. Twice I fell, cutting my hands on rocks and branches. But fear kept me moving, even as my lungs burned and my injured ankle throbbed. After what felt like hours, I saw lights through the trees, my neighbor's house. I staggered onto their porch, pounding on their door, collapsing when they opened it. Through broken sobs, I told them what had happened. The husband immediately reached for his phone to call 911, while the wife wrapped me in blankets, trying to warm my shivering body. Police arrived 30 minutes later, taking my statement before proceeding to our cabin with guns drawn. I stayed with the neighbors, numb with shock and fear for my mother. The officers returned an hour later with news that changed my life forever. They'd found my mother, alive but badly injured. She'd managed to fight off the attacker, wounding him with the poker before he fled. The cabin was in disarray, evidence of the violent struggle everywhere. But that wasn't all they found. In the guest bedroom where we'd heard the glass break, they discovered a duffel bag containing duct tape, sedatives, more knives, and plastic sheeting. On the living room wall, written in what turned out to be red paint, was a message. The Whistler takes two. Investigators later determined there had indeed been two men. They'd planned the attack carefully, choosing our remote cabin during a storm when communication would be impossible. They'd cut our phone lines before the storm even hit and used signal jammers to block cell reception. Most chilling of all, they'd been watching us for days. Police found a crude campsite in the woods nearby with evidence suggesting someone had been living there, observing our routines. They even found a notebook with details about us, when we went to bed, which rooms we used most often, even notes about which windows were left unlocked. My post on Facebook did eventually go through when service was restored. By then, police were already at our cabin, but the post went viral in our community. People were horrified that something so terrifying could happen in our small town. The men were never caught. Sometimes, especially during storms, I still hear whistling in the wind. Mom and I both go to therapy now. We never returned to the cabin. Dad sold it the following month. But the hardest part is knowing they're still out there somewhere, perhaps watching another family, waiting for another rainy night to become the whistler in the storm. I check the locks obsessively now, and I can't sleep without a light on. Every unexpected noise makes me freeze. But I'm sharing this story because people need to know. Sometimes the monsters outside your window are real, and sometimes they come inside,